Hello everyone and welcome back to the Second Party Podcast. I'm back again with my wife today, and I wanted to talk a little bit about some experiences I've had recently, where I've heard some folks really denigrating those that have blue-collar jobs. I want to explore a little bit maybe why this has been the case, and hopefully through that garner some insight into how we can better understand folks that perform blue-collar jobs and hopefully appreciate them a little bit more. So when I was young and kind of growing up, I think like most people, I had a number of I think what you'd deem blue-collar jobs, right? So things like food service, retail, manual labor type of things.
As a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, most kids kind of start off like that, right?
Right.
I mean, even babysitting you can kind of say is like a blue-collar job of sorts, right?
I mean, how do you define what is a blue-collar job? Do you have a definition for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think it would be people that have a physical nature to the job that's kind of primary to it, right? So you can't be a remote babysitter.
Like it's more
right.
Physical than it is mental, maybe?
Maybe. I mean, there's certainly a mental component, but
yeah,
I guess I'd say like the physical component can't be removed. So all of these jobs that like once were remote work, that once were in person, that became remote work with COVID, right? Like those aren't blue-collar jobs because you don't have to be there in person to do them.
What's the actual dictionary definition? Do you have one?
So Wikipedia says a blue-collar worker is a working-class person who performs manual labor. Blue-collar work may involve skilled or unskilled labor. And then they give a number of different examples. But generally, there's a physical component to it.
Manual labor, you're doing something physically.
Yeah, versus if you're an accountant,
yeah,
you can work on a computer. It's not a highly physical task.
Sure, and they're saying it could be skilled or unskilled in the sense of like you could be flipping burgers or you could be welding or doing intense like woodworking or things that take a high level of skilled. So maybe like lower skilled working is a subsect of blue collar working.
Sure.
What I'm trying to say is or distinguish is like a blue collar job is not necessarily always a low skill job.
Correct. And there are white collar jobs that are unskilled as well.
Sure.
You could just be entering data, right? It's not terribly skillful to just look at paper and enter
I get
what it says. Okay.
So most teenagers probably most likely you're working blue collar type jobs, doing some kind of physical or manual labor rather than sitting at a desk or something.
Yeah, because you haven't built up the skills that are the skills and repertoire necessary for many white-collar jobs. And by the way, many of the blue-collar jobs that people are doing are more on the unskilled end, right? So working food service or retail, you can come in with zero experience and they'll teach you how to do it, versus like a blue-collar job would be like deep sea welding. Yeah, well, like this is a highly skilled position,
right,
but it's still blue-collared because it's very manual intensive. You know, I think people, despite how most people start out young and they have some blue-collar jobs and they have some insight into it, I think that people kind of forget about what that was like oftentimes. You know, we're still...
When they get later in life and have maybe white collar jobs.
Yeah, they're more used to that type of thing. And you don't have to be that far out from it, generally speaking, to kind of forget what that day to day looks like. I mean, we're relatively new in kind of the white collar workforce, but even so, we've still forgotten some of those things, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, there's some level of that is natural. You don't appreciate something as much when you're not actively doing it yourself every day,
Yeah.
or appreciate what has to go into it.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like, a lot of times, I think people in the blue collar workforce, whether skilled or unskilled, oftentimes go underappreciated. And I've been seeing that more and more recently. I think labor is short and people are doing their best, but obviously things get a bit slower than they were before. We talked about this a couple episodes back. I think it was episode 9, where we were talking about there being help wanted signs all over the place. I still see that now. I still see people advertising starting salaries, trying to get as many people in the door because they're still so short staffed.
Yeah.
I mean, we have friends that are general managers of stores or friends that own their own shops, and I've heard from all of these people that they're just continually looking for help. They just can't get enough hands on board to get that work done. There's one instance recently where we were at Chipotle, not necessarily during a terribly busy time, right? I think it was maybe 3 or 4 o'clock, right? And we're sitting in line, and it's going real slow, and I'm kind of looking around, and I can tell that they're short on people, right? And a couple of the people were going pretty slow, and they looked on the younger side. I kind of thought to myself, well, they're probably new. It was near the beginning of the summer, right? Maybe these kids are getting the job here for the first time. They're getting acclimated to things, not used to everything yet. So obviously things are going to go a bit slower, right? Plus they're short staffed, so that's just piling up with stuff. And a dude, a few people groups up, he started just yelling. And when I say yelling, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. This is not someone hollering. This dude is yelling at like the top of his lungs.
Yeah, and I don't know what triggered it either, because it's not like he was not up to the front of the line ordering food yet. He was still
he wasn't
back in line, but
he was
just
about halfway
all of a sudden, like, something snapped. I don't know if he was at the last straw in his day. I don't know. But
yeah,
he snapped.
I don't know. So he starts flipping out and yelling, and he's directing this yelling at one of the people who's on the line taking orders, and they're making your food in front of you. And he starts yelling at her, and I remember so distinctly. He said, "I used to work here." Now, I don't know if he worked at this exact Chipotle location, but if he's saying "I used to work here," to me that it just blew me away that he was sitting here saying "I used to work here," and I'm going to scream at someone who's just trying to do their job here.
Like, you should know how maybe stressful it can be.
Yeah.
Working at Chipotle.
How stressful, or how many
Yeah.
things you have to juggle, or what onboarding is like, or even what onboarding somebody else is like.
Well, and I think part of what he was getting frustrated at was he was watching everything they were doing and saying, "You're doing this wrong. You're not organizing your line right. Like, you're not wiping things down. You're not having the right people do the right things. This guy should be over here doing this." And so he was like getting all worked up and started yelling at them like, I used to work here. I know how this should be run. You're not running this
Yeah,
properly.
you're right. And he was trying to
And
tell people to
he's
do
trying to tell
stuff.
people, like, hey, you need to go over here and do this.
Well, and I'd like to clarify too, it was an efficiency thing. It wasn't like a food or health hazard type of thing, right?
Yeah, he was just getting ticked off at how slow it was going. Which we were all a little, like, we were all hungry. We're obviously there because we're hungry. We're all waiting in line.
Yeah,
We all want to get our food. But yeah, I mean, he went off.
yeah. And I really felt for the workers because, first off, I understand what that job's like. You know, I've worked at a place like that before, and I understand that even when people are fine or just amicable, you you can be having a tough day. You know, maybe something happened in the back, or there are just a whole bunch of people, or you're short staffed, or whatever it is. You can so easily be having just a really tough day at a job like that. And because it's something that requires your full like physical engagement constantly, and you continually need to be doing something, it's not like a white collar job where you can just go take a lunch and have an hour off or step away from things for a second.
Right.
You're constantly in it. You don't really have a break. I felt so bad for this girl, and I was about to say something, and then the cashier, he didn't yell, but he was kind of projecting his voice, I'd say. He kind of hollered back, basically saying, I hear that you're annoyed with these wait times, but you can't be yelling at our employees.
Right.
And
I can get a manager for
yeah,
you
we
if
can
you
get a
want to talk
manager
to a
for you if you
manager,
want to
but
talk to a manager, which to me is
yeah.
just is the funniest thing because I said it was a dude, but in my mind I was just thinking, "Oh great, we're getting the manager out." And I've been in those back rooms when the manager gets called out, and just the look on this manager's face, I could just envision it before this manager even came out. Just, ugh, what do I have to deal with now? What crazy is yelling up in the front of the store now? So this manager comes out and she tries to calm the dude down, and she's trying to get him to stop yelling. And at some point, he kind of toned it down. He wasn't screaming, but he was still talking very loudly and was very disruptive. And he just stomped out of the store.
Yeah, he
You
just
remember?
left.
Yeah.
It's like how long he stood there in line and then he just decided to yell and tell everyone how they were doing it wrong
Yeah.
and then just leave.
Yeah. So I felt kind of bad, but I was also happy because we were one spot closer.
That's true. Yeah.
So I was
We'd
trying
have
to look
come
on the
out.
bright side.
Yeah, but those poor workers, I mean,
I felt bad.
yeah.
Well, when we got up, I said to the cashier, like, I used to work in a place like this. You handled that perfectly. Like, I really appreciate what you did there. Because he's totally right. You can't just start yelling at people. You shouldn't tolerate that. And this whole mentality of the customer is always right. This is just not true. You can't be screaming at people. So I wanted to kind of dive into why things like this may happen. You know, I think part of it is that lack of appreciation for people that are in like these blue collar jobs. And I think it pretty quickly manifests into negativity and hostility when there's a lack of appreciation, right? I oftentimes see people encouraging their followers to try and make someone's day, whether that's by tipping generously or just being a nice person. I mean, I always think that we should tip generously in America. I think it says more about you when you're tipping than it does about some service that you did or didn't receive. I think it's great if you can make someone's day while working at McDonald's or Walmart. That's great. But today I want to kind of explore the deeper problem here and why people in these positions aren't appreciated to begin with. Because if we can resolve this appreciation, I think the actions will come naturally out of it, And I think that people won't need to go out of their way as much to support and encourage blue collar workers if everyone's just kind of doing their part.
Yeah, maybe a caveat here is like, you know, there are good and there are bad workers in every position.
Of course.
Right. There are some people that you might encounter at Walmart or Target or McDonald's or wherever, employees who are not being professional, who are not acting appropriately,
Of course.
who are, in the wrong also. So it's not to say like, there's no one that's not respectable in those kinds of positions, but I think what we're kind of focusing on here is just as a whole, like taking a zoomed out approach, these types of positions, people tend to not respect them very much.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's...
And yet they benefit from people who work in those positions every day. More than they know.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think you get food on your table? How did you get the mail today delivered to your door?
Yeah.
How did you get the electricity that you use in your house? The water that you took a shower with, right?
Yeah.
All these things, you rely on people who are doing those jobs.
Yeah. I think the reason for the lack of appreciation is different depending on what group of workers we're talking about. And I think there are kind of two main groups. The first is frontline, kind of customer-facing, entry-level positions. So we're talking about retail workers, food service workers, people that you're interacting with. And then the second category is more advanced, usually not customer-facing positions. So you mentioned welders earlier. We've got, to a degree, delivery truck drivers, right? Truckers, things like that.
People working at warehouses, people packaging things, people sorting mail.
Yeah.
You're not seeing the things they do in front of your eyes as you're walking through a store going grocery shopping.
Yeah. So in the first example with the more frontline, customer-facing, entry-level type of positions, this is kind of like what we encountered at Chipotle, I think. I think people often forget the experiences that they had, and they forget just how much those jobs can really be tough with a few bad customers or a few big problems that happen that you're not able to step away from, like we talked about earlier. And as a result, they only really are thinking about themselves, and they're not really considering how that other person is feeling. And at least to a degree, this makes sense. When you're walking about daily life, you can't pay every single person that you're interacting with the exact same amount of attention, right? When you come home to your spouse or your kids, you're obviously going to pay more attention to them than you are to the person who's checking you out in the grocery line. And I think oftentimes we become dismissive and we forget that those people who are checking out in the grocery line or making your food at Chipotle, that those people are people too. And this is not some unique revolutionary idea, but I think that oftentimes what happens is however somebody's feeling in the moment, that gets put on somebody like that.
Right.
You just get some unfiltered, unfettered emotion from earlier in the day. And if you had a crappy day, then that's what's going to come out. If you're having an okay day, then it's just kind of an irrelevant interaction, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think in instances like that, there's a degree of thoughtfulness and needing to slow down in life that we need to work on. We talked about this earlier with how to convince people and how to empathize with people in our previous episode where we were talking about panhandling. That mentality would also help resolve instances like this. We're humanizing people because we're able to take just an extra minute, an extra few seconds to interact with that person, to not just dump your emotional load on them.
Right. I mean, it doesn't even take more time to just, smile at someone, to say thank you, say have a good day when you're, you're grabbing your food or whatever.
Yeah. There's a great scene at the end of probably my favorite romance movie of all time, which is About Time. So spoilers if you haven't seen it yet, but in the end, the dude kind of comes to the realization that he comes to the not terribly unique realization that he needs to take every day and really embrace it and try and make the most of it. And we get a montage where he goes throughout a day and has these kind of negative interactions. Things are kind of gloomy and he's not particularly happy.
He's stressed out. He's
stressed
unsure,
out. Yeah. And then he repeats the day and we see him go through these interactions, and just the smallest interaction with a coworker where he's joking around or he talks to a barista, and just actually focusing on that interaction and what's at hand instead of some other thing and dumping his stress and rushing between things. I think it's really illustrative of the difference in mentality and that shift that I think we should focus on making.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not an easy task to do either, necessarily.
No, it's not.
I mean, life is busy and life is crazy and life is stressful.
Mm-hmm.
That, yeah, it's hard to just always be in a a positive mood, and you're not going to always have these above and beyond positive interactions with all these people you're seeing out and about.
Yeah. And obviously you're not necessarily always going to be able to give everyone every single second of your day, but I think that even if you add a few seconds to an interaction so that at least it goes from something that would have been like negative to something that's at least neutral, I think that goes a long way too, so that you don't flip out in the Chipotle line because your burrito's taken a few extra minutes.
Well, and part of it too that I've really noticed is, I've noticed just how much I really appreciate when those workers are just so positive and happy with you. Like, it can just, it's a two-way street, right? Like, it can make my day. There was one time when we were at Trader Joe's, and I don't know what it is, but all the workers at Trader Joe's are always just above and beyond, over the top friendly.
Yeah, they must do something in their training.
There's got to be
always
something.
Have enough folks, there so that people don't get us stressed out or something.
There's got to be something that they train the people who work at Trader Joe's. But this one guy, he was just the friendliest guy, and we were checking out and he was just being super bubbly. At Trader Joe's, another thing I've noticed, they always ask, like, how's your day going? Like, how you doing today? Or they say something, you got any fun plans tonight? Ooh, what you gonna do with this cauliflower? Like, they're just making comments and kind of being very friendly.
They're probably spiking the trail mix in the back room or something.
I don't know what they're doing. Something. But this guy, he was ringing up all my items, and then he asked me, do you want a bag for this today?
Yeah,
and
we just had a few.
Yeah, I had a few items. I didn't really want to carry them without a bag, so I was like, yeah, that'd be great. And his response was, all right, yeah, we can make dreams happen. We'll do it. And it was just so funny. Like, I actually started laughing, and this guy was just so easy to interact with, so lighthearted. Like, I was able to leave that interaction with a smile on my face.
When we joke about it, kind of to this day.
Yeah, when we were leaving, his response was just verbatim, "Have the best day ever." That's what he said. Have the best day ever. Or maybe I think it was more specific than that, because it was like a Tuesday or something, and he's like, "Have the best Tuesday ever."
Yeah, I think it was something like that. Yeah, have the best Tuesday ever. And we can make dreams happen.
We can make dreams happen. You want a bag? We'll make that happen. And I really appreciate people who are like that, because I recognize that this is not always the easiest job to do. It's there are pros and cons of having jobs like this, but you have to go in, right? You got to log your time. You got to sit there. You got to be interacting with customers all
You're
day.
on your feet constantly.
Yeah, it's not like just a walk in the park all the time. And so the people who go and do that and they put on a good attitude, they smile, and they are like, even if I can just make one person smile today and have one positive interaction where someone can walk away feeling, feeling seen or feeling like they're cared about at this store, that goes a long way. And I really appreciate workers who are like that. I was also thinking about how I don't know why this really like hit me recently, but I was with my family helping my grandpa move, and he had hired some movers to come. And my grandpa lives in like a small town, a few hours outside of the city, and he hired these movers, which in this small town was like the only moving company.
Yeah, not
I think.
many options. Yeah.
I think my grandpa said there were two moving companies. He called both of them, and this was the one who returned his call. So
Not many options.
So we were there. We were like helping him move, and these moving guys come, and there's one guy who's kind of like running the show.
Sure.
And he brings a few of his buddies, and they've got this truck, and they come. And just immediately, like, these people are just so friendly. And I was, like, not exactly in the best mood this day because I was tired. We had traveled, several hours.
You gotta lift
in
a
the
bunch
car.
of boxes.
There was so much stuff to move,
thrilling.
too. Like, it was kind of overwhelming.
Yeah.
And these movers weren't moving everything. They were just moving, like, big things that we couldn't move. So I was, like, not in the best mood about this whole moving thing. And these workers come up, and they're so positive and smiley and happy, and they're talking to us, and we find out that this guy who's like kind of facilitating everything, my grandpa was an art teacher in this small town when he was in his career, and we found out that my grandpa was this guy's art teacher back when he was like in 7th grade or something. And so it's just like, maybe part of this is small town vibes, right? Like,
yeah,
you get some of that in small town kind of things. But it really struck me, like, as I was sitting there, I was packing up boxes of dishware, not having a good time. And I was just watching, these guys were coming in and moving all this furniture, and this main guy who was facilitating everything kept kind of poking fun at his workers a little bit, talking about like, oh, these I don't remember the word he used, but something, just kind of poking fun at these guys, like, oh, they're not the brightest tools in the box or whatever. That's not the phrase. Yeah, but he was kind of poking fun at these guys a little bit, and he kept being like, nope, you gotta carry it this way, like telling them what to do, as if he was bossing them around a little bit. And I was just kind of like watching these movers and really struck with like, here are 4 or 5 people who they're not doing, maybe they think it's fun, but for me, they're not doing a job that I would think is fun.
Sure.
Right? I had to come do this for one day, and I was in a bad mood. And here they come, they show up, they've got smiles on their faces. I'm having a positive experience interacting with them, and they're moving furniture, and they came to work, and they're putting in that effort, putting in that time, making an honest living, right?
Yeah.
Doing what
like they're doing their best.
They can do.
Yeah.
Like, this is something that they can do, and they are using the resources that they've been given to be productive and do work and get something done that is something they can do. And they're doing a good job at it.
Yeah.
Good enough. My brother works at a furniture store, so he moves furniture around all the time. He was kind of critiquing them a little bit with how they were moving things, and they were maybe not the best movers in my brother's mind, but I was thinking about how, you know what? It's a small town. These guys have shown up. They're doing it. They're grinding it out. And there's a lot to be said for people who who use their time productively like that and are willing
Yeah.
to go make an honest living. You know, maybe you can't go be an executive at a company, right? Maybe you can't go be doing all these things, or you don't want to, but you go do what you can do and what you're good at. And there's something to respect there. And so I was just thinking about that as this guy was, you know, kind of making these a little bit berating comments about his workers, and just like, I have a lot of respect for these guys.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a good thing they're doing.
I think there's a lot of dignity to be found in doing jobs that are necessary and doing those things well, and actually putting in your best effort for it.
Yeah, and I wonder if part of this too is just that people in general, I think in our society, take a very negative view of work, just in general.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they don't appreciate or value work, and like, working, doing things, being productive is a good thing. Humans need to be doing that. Like, we were not made and designed to just be sitting around sipping martinis on the beach all day doing nothing. Like, that would not be a fulfilling life, right? And we really romanticize like retirement and being done working and all this stuff, and I get it. Like, it's not like I don't look forward to retirement kind of thing, but I think maybe part of it is just we have to be more careful how we're viewing work, because work is a respectable thing.
Yeah, I think we need to bring a sense of dignity back into certain jobs, and a greater respect for people that do them. And I think that really applies to blue collar jobs in particular, when I think nowadays so much emphasis is put on a level of prestige or on what you get paid at the end of the day.
Right.
And the reality is that for many of these blue collar jobs, especially those, you know, in that first category, the frontline customer facing entry level type of jobs, because they're entry level, they're usually paid a bit lower and they don't have that much prestige. And as a result, we put this like low value on them. And, you know, in one sense, they are lower valued jobs from an economic standpoint, because it's more easy to replace people. It's an entry level type of position, and that's why they're compensated less than other positions. But that doesn't mean that it's any bit less necessary as a job that needs to be done.
Right. Or less respectable when there's someone doing a good job at that.
Exactly.
And it's well suited to their, you know, their abilities and their skills and everything.
So I think that while it may be difficult in practice, is a fair answer to what we can do to appreciate that first category of blue collar jobs a little bit better. I think taking that extra second, recognizing that this is a job that needs to be done, recognizing that while it may not be compensated or have the prestige of another job, that the necessity and the dignity that comes in doing an honest day's labor and doing good work at your job, I think is something that we need to focus more on. When it comes to that second group, the more advanced non-customer facing positions, I think these positions are underappreciated for a bit of a different reason.
Because people don't even realize that they are happening because you don't see them?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. So I think people denigrate these jobs because, at least in part, they don't understand the job itself. You know, if you've done tiling or you've built, let's say, a cabinet door, you have an understanding of what that entails. Mm-hmm. And while you may not have built an entire home, you have a a lens and a bit of insight into building an entire home, right? Because part of if you built everything in the home, you understand is, there's framing, there's drywall, there's electrical, there's tiling. We need to build and install cabinets. And you've done part of that, and you'd have some experience and understand that there are nuances and complexities and that it's not as easy as it appears on the surface. And then you can kind of mentally apply that to all of the other activities that you may not have done yet. So you may not have done framing, but you have done tiling, and you understand that tiling ended up being more difficult than you anticipated. So then you can kind of apply a bit of the same mentality or realization to framing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of like what we were talking about in our art episode, right? Like, the best way to appreciate art or appreciate certain things is by trying to do it yourself. Like, that's
a great point.
That's how we learn to appreciate several different forms of art. And I think since we got a house and started doing things in the house and trying to take on projects, now I see how hard it is to do drywall mudding. Right? Ugh. I tried it and it looks terrible. Like, it looks like a 4-year-old tried to frost a cake. It looks horrendous. So now when I see, all the other walls in my house that were done by a professional
and look great,
I have a way better appreciation for when someone's good at that and they're doing a good job.
Yeah, I remember one of the projects we were doing required us to cut mosaic glass tile.
Oh, it's awful.
And we had a good glass cutter with a sharp blade that was, properly lubricated and had good water throughput, and it was just still a nightmare. The glass shards going everywhere, trying to make precise cuts.
It was awful.
It's not a fun thing. I have way more respect when I look at some project that has tons of glass mosaic tiles and annoying edges and tons of
tiny grout lines.
Yeah, little grout lines, and trying to polish off each little mosaic glass tile so that it didn't look hazy.
The grout haze.
Oh my goodness. It's just a nightmare. Yeah. And then you look at an entire shower that's done in glass mosaic tile and you just start thinking, how much time was spent just getting this stupid grout haze off of each little mosaic tile. You have a much greater appreciation. And I think most people haven't done jobs like this. Like, most people don't do a bunch of tiling, at least in kind of first world countries like America. Most people aren't doing jobs like this. Right. And as a result, they don't have this kind of understanding. If you go back in the past, I think people had these experiences on like a daily basis. If you go back far enough, people built their own homes. People frequently would perform maintenance on their cars. They'd be cleaning out the carburetors. They'd be doing brake jobs. This was a common thing for people to do.
That's a different era, probably, than when people would build their own homes.
Yes. It's a different era. But I'm saying there was a point where people entirely built their homes, and then there was an era where people did many things they did many things to their own homes. They made modifications and did service to their cars. So they had some understanding of the car so that when it did go into a mechanic, they had a better understanding.
People grew their own food, right? Like, you go way back, like, people had to do everything to survive by themselves, essentially. Yeah. And obviously there are great economic benefits to the specialization,
of course,
that we've been able to establish, right? Like, I don't think we're saying you should go do everything yourself. No. Because obviously that's how our economy works, is you have these different services and goods that different people are specialized to provide to you, and it's more efficient that way.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, we're not doing mudding again.
No, I'm not doing that again.
We suck at mudding.
I'm never doing
Not
that
doing
again.
mudding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. Things have become more specialized, and I think technology and that specialization has allowed for more white collar jobs. As a result, many people have lost these skills and experiences that in the past
Yeah.
they would have had.
And therefore appreciation for the manual labor that goes into so many things that are necessary for our way of life.
Yeah, and on the surface, that kind of seems fine, but when you lack the ability to relate to someone, you kind of start to see them and their work as less.
Yeah.
You know, when we're talking about taking an extra second, it's so that we can remember that that is a person like us. And while that seems simple and obvious, it's not something that is always at the forefront of your mind. And I think previously people had a better understanding of the work and the person doing the work, and as a result, more reverence for it. But as the former went away, so did the latter.
And by the way, we get this going the other way too. This is a whole trend now in our society of like, oh, all these people running companies, this is just ridiculous. They don't do anything.
Oh,
It's all the right, it's all the direct labor that's doing all the work. Why does Elon Musk have billions and billions of dollars, right?
yeah.
He does nothing. And it's like, okay, he does nothing, really. You think he does nothing. You can think that he shouldn't get paid what he does or get all, have all the money he does. You can think that that's fine. But to sit here and say, like, he does nothing,
Yeah.
like, you don't understand what goes into what he does, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not true that those types of positions are just completely unnecessary
Yeah.
for all these companies to run. Someone has to take liability on themselves. Someone has to be responsible for making tough decisions.
Mm-hmm.
There are pros and cons to both these positions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Elon Musk gets paid crazy amounts of money. Well, I don't know how his salary position works out. I think he technically doesn't take a salary like from Tesla, right? Or I don't know how that works out, but you can sit here and say he shouldn't be this rich and have all this money, and it's really the people assembling the cars that are doing all the work. It's like both of these are necessary positions, right? It's like you are all a part of the body of the operation.
Yeah.
And you can't operate without all those positions. Someone needs to take that risk upon themselves, right? If the company goes under, the people assembling the cars, they can go find a job at another car company, right? Doing something similar, most likely.
Yeah.
They're not taking this risk of a company going under on themselves. They're not having to make difficult decisions, but they're not getting paid as much. So
Yeah.
which one do you want?
Yeah. I mean, I think in both cases, the less you understand about someone's position, the more people tend to think that it's easier than it is. The closer you get, the more insight you gain, the more you realize that there are all these complex parts to it that you didn't think about.
Yeah, well, it's like that curve, right? Of as your knowledge about a subject goes up, and then how knowledgeable you think you are on the subject.
Yeah.
Right.
It
Like
drops pretty
it
quick.
drops, like it goes down. So it's almost like for a while it goes down, right?
Yeah, you realize that you don't
The
know.
more you know about something, the more you feel like you don't know, right?
Yeah. I think with many blue collar jobs, people don't understand them. But arguably, I think there's a more insidious step still. There are now many jobs that people don't even know exist. And oftentimes these jobs support their daily lives. So it's not just that they don't understand what the job entails. It's that they don't even know about the existence of that job.
Sure.
So take, for example, people that work on natural gas pipelines. These people install and maintain underground pipe that runs everywhere. Mm-hmm. This heats people's homes. It helps them cook. It allows them to take warm showers. Yet many people don't think beyond setting the temperature on their thermostat. The thought does not even cross their minds. I used to read a book with my grandma. It was called Underground, and it talks about and has great illustrations of all of the different things that occur below ground, all of the different utilities that are run, all the different structures that are down there, and it has little parts and blurbs about how it's managed and different aspects of them. And that's always been something that I'm really interested in, but most people who, let's say, aren't engineers, I think the average non-engineer doesn't really think about stuff like that unless they work in an industry or an adjacent industry to something like that.
Right.
I've met people who I've asked, like, okay, how do you think this gets to your house? And they just go, oh, I don't know. I just think you flip the switch and it comes on.
Yeah.
And to a degree, like, I get why. Most of the time you're not encountered with anything that requires you to have that knowledge. But, I think when we have this type of thing apply to so many different things, like think about every single utility we have, whether that's water or sewage or electrical. People don't think about the immense amount of work and the hundreds of thousands of people that facilitate those services. And that's not even to mention things upstream of these. Water treatment facilities, power plants, frackers, server centers for internet and cloud-based things. Modern people never have to think about these services. If you built your own home, you would have to think about them all. You may not know exactly how to run a power plant or weld steel pipe, but you'd know how to install something like an electrical box. You'd know how to copper weld, and that would give you a taste, even if it's a small one, into that world. And how important and complex it gets. I think oftentimes, the only time that modern people think about these services is when something goes wrong. There's a quote at the end of the movie Tenet, and maybe it's a little bit of a spoiler, but the quote is, nobody cares or nobody notices the bomb that didn't go off. And I think it's kind of the same thing with a lot of these blue collar jobs. Like, you don't think about that until something goes wrong or it's not 100% always there. 100% reliable. When the power goes out, when a water treatment facility misses something, these are the only times that people think about these immensely important jobs. Day-to-day lives, you don't. If you only thought about or interacted with someone in a negative way, you'd probably grow to have kind of a disdain for them, right? You certainly wouldn't be grateful for them if every single thought or interaction was negative. I've been to job sites and stood in trenches talking to these people. I've worked in manufacturing and shipping facilities and seen their inner workings. I've toured power plants and worked with quality control teams. I've worked and designed with machinists. I've talked with foremen and coordinated projects, and I've seen this work done on crushed timetables, well below freezing temperatures, or in just the most scorching heat, in rain and snow, and these projects just keep going. You have to have somebody resolving the power outage, whether it's negative 20 below and it's snowing, or if it's the dead of the summer and it's 100 plus degrees Fahrenheit. Like, somebody has to get the power back on.
If anything, those extreme times are when it's most critical
Yeah,
that
probably.
the power comes back on.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, I've seen so many things go wrong and seen people have to resolve them just on the spot. And these are not simple jobs. The people that do them are not dumb. These people are so unbelievably necessary. They're likely more necessary than many of the white collar jobs out there.
Or necessary than than any of the Instagram influencers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you go back in time, many of these white collar jobs that we have nowadays didn't exist because the first thing you need is to stay warm.
Yeah, it's almost like a lot of these more maybe modern, cushy, like white collar type jobs. Like I kind of joke around about the Instagram influencer, but seriously, right? Like
Yeah.
these things are privileges of a society that has advanced to a point where we can afford to have things like that people do. You know, like we have such an excess and an abundance of resources that people labor can be expended in that way. Like, that was not true until modern history.
Yeah, not too long ago, every single labor hour was spent staying alive on
Yeah.
the bare necessities, on getting food, on hunting, on gathering, on keeping warm, keeping the animals and the environment at bay. It wasn't until
It's like that's a
very
full-time
recent.
job, is just trying to survive.
Yeah,
Like rewind time 2000 years ago, right?
yeah,
Like that's a full-time job. You don't even have to go 2000 years. You can go 200 years ago. Right?
yeah.
Like
Or
that
or just today in some places.
Yeah, right, that's true. You can't sit here as a white collar person doing, you know, graphic design at a social media company or a YouTube or Twitch streamer or whatever. You can't sit here and then denigrate or not appreciate the people who are getting you power to keep your computer on so you can keep, you know, playing your video games.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you're not better than those people
yeah.
because you have a white collar job.
Well,
Yeah.
I think we need to realize, I've heard it described as, like, we're standing on a layer of, like, ice in the middle of the lake. And we've forgotten that there's an entire lake beneath us. And if this ice cracks and we fall in, like, what's going to happen? If something like the power all goes down, like, how many people actually know how to resolve and fix stuff like this? Like, these people are so necessary that a massive amount of society would just collapse if that knowledge was lost, or if we didn't have that anymore. So much of society is built on that. So much else can't even begin to exist without some of these baseline things that are afforded to us by people that do blue collar jobs. And I think that understanding, both from kind of a generalized conceptual viewpoint, but also from a more intricate standpoint, to me, that's the answer, and that's what helps shift people's mentality to be more appreciative of these blue collar workers and stop denigrating them so much. Because you're not going to denigrate someone whose shoulders you're standing on. You know?
Someone who you have a proper appreciation of. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we need to do our best to recognize that and reacquaint ourselves with some of these things. And part of that is going out and having some experiences that are like that, trying to do some more manual labor things to get a better, like, true understanding of what that type of work entails, both from a physical exertion and effort standpoint as well as a mental standpoint, and understanding that, yeah, it can get very complicated and quickly. I think that will result in a greater appreciation for blue collar jobs and help to bridge some of that divide and animosity that's oftentimes there. Well, it's getting late, but recently I've been musing about something that has been happening a little bit more frequently, and that's that I'll forget something that's kind of on the tip of my tongue, or maybe more accurately, I'll have some thoughts about something, but won't write them down yet, or won't talk to somebody about them. And then I'll kind of forget it, but I'll remember that there was something I was thinking about. And while it's been happening more, the rate that I'm remembering these things after the fact, after really thinking about it, is almost 100%. And I've kind of likened it in my mind to a sneeze. Something where it's building up and you just want to get it out, and then boom, in one instant you have this level of relief. And it's so satisfying, and there's kind of been this build up, and you remember it, and then you can write it down real quick, or you remember that word. It's so satisfying. I think we should have like a word or a defined phrase. Perhaps there's one in another language like German or French, something kind of like deja vu or call of the void that describes that feeling. Perhaps there is one. If you know of one, let us know. Or if you've got any topics that you think would be interesting for us to address, send us an email or a voice recording at secondpartypodcast@gmail.com. And perhaps we'll discuss them on another episode of ours. With that, thank you again for listening. Have a good night.